We saw this from the beginning, a billion-dollar opportunity.
That's Adam Ranklin. By we, he means him and his 7 co-founders. They'd raised over $137 million for their startup Pitch, but then they realized that it'd be better as a cash-flowing business.
Something wasn't working. We came to an agreement with our investors to kind of refinance the company by giving back a lot of the money.
He opened up and told me what made him realize that venture capital wasn't the right path. Also, how he kept the company motivated after having to lay off 2/3 of the team, and what goes into a great pitch deck. This is Adam Ranklin's founding journey.
All right, Adam. So I guess let's just dive in. I had 2 co-founders on my last venture-backed company, but Pitch was started with, I believe, 8 total founders. We had 3 in total, and everything was super chaotic. Decision-making gets harder the more people you add to it. I can only imagine what having you plus 7 other people must have been like. What did you implement to sort of make it possible to keep shipping quickly and also keep everyone on the same page?
Yeah, so I think one of the most important things about having 8 co-founders or 7 co-founders for me, is that you should know each other for a long time before you go into this kind of marriage. So we had been friends and worked together for almost a decade before we started Pitch. So we knew we could trust each other under pressure. We knew what each of our strengths and weaknesses were. The vision of labor, once we started, felt fairly simple. Of course, there were also times when we were all like in a room together debating over a decision, and it gets heated. I think that's one of the famous Steve Jobs quotes, that you create great things when you have some friction. You need that friction to kind of bring out the best in everyone. I think what really helped us also is that we had our, let's call it our main co-founder or main founder, Christian, who had been the CEO of company we previously worked together at, Six Wunderkinder, that made Wunderlist. And he was the one who brought us all together. He hosted the first dinner, and we said we were going to start something together. So it wasn't like we were 8 co-founders on an equal footing from the beginning, but he was kind of pulling us in that direction, and we were happy to follow him. And then over time, other roles crystallized. So I joined, when we started this, I thought I would be an engineer. That's what I wanted to do. But immediately we needed to hire some people, make some architectural decisions, things like that. And that just kind of landed naturally with me. We figured out how to divide things up, that we are not creating islands. We're talking a lot. Yeah, like I said in the beginning, it really helps if you have people that you know really well, so you can speak very openly about things, because there are going to be things where you don't agree, where you have to make a decision that half of you are unsatisfied with. So you have to be able to talk openly about that, and then put it to rest and move on, and not have resentment grow or anything. So I think that is definitely a recipe for like long-term unhappiness.
Want to get more insights like that? Each week, I actually interview multiple founders. For the ones who don't join the podcast, I write up a case study and share it with all founding journey members. I also write weekly tactical deep dives, share startup opportunities, and analyze trends that I'm noticing. We've also got a community of founders, an investor and pitch deck database, and more fun stuff, like over $60,000 in perks and discounts to help you build, grow, and raise capital for your startup. Go to join.foundingjourney.com to get access.
Yeah, I totally agree. And you are the CEO now, and you started out obviously as the CTO for, I think, 6 years. And I've heard you talk about sort of the importance of being a product CEO, product-focused CEO, since you've taken over that role. Obviously, that comes through in the product itself. You guys have built pitches beautifully designed. The UX is really good. Users seem super happy. At least I am as a user. What are sort of the upsides and downsides of being a product-led CEO? And maybe said differently, having a company with a product-led CEO?
Yeah, so I think looking at what could be alternatives is that you have a very sales-driven, business-driven CEO. And I think the upside of that is that you get really good at creating partnerships with other companies. Whereas if you have a product-driven CEO, product-driven company leadership, Like you tend to focus quite a lot on just making the best possible product and then, getting the distribution to get it out to people, but hoping that the product will speak for itself, which I think that approach works quite well with the idea of product-led growth, right? That you create these viral loops that spread the product among people as opposed to, having a very strong sense for where should we place ads. I think it goes further than just being a product-led CEO. At least in Pitch's case, we built up a product-driven team. So when we were hiring for engineers, one of the things that we were testing for in interviews was that, can you name your favorite product? Can you describe why you love it? And hopefully the answer is not always Emacs, although it often is. Can you look at a product and have an emotion around it? Can you articulate why something is better or worse? Because then we can make sure that it's not just designers making screens that product managers have told them to do and then engineers implementing, but you all come together and collaborate on creating something. And that means that everyone is wearing some form of product hat all the time. And in the new rebooted Pitch, since I took over and we also shrunk a lot in size, we do product discussions in the whole company together. We're 37 people. So we just, meet all of us, talk about different opportunities and features on a board. It's actually a pitch presentation, but we talk about it from different perspectives. So one of the most valuable functions for me as a product-driven CEO is our customer-facing teams, because they are the ones that spend the most times with current and future customers and can really help us go beyond what people say that they need to really uncover what are the real pain points that we can solve for and make a product that hopefully feels not just useful, because that's baseline, but also really delightful, something that you enjoy using.
I guess if you were to go back to before you became CEO, CEO is obviously a very different job than CTO, right? So I think a lot of people listening to this might be either first-time CEOs who were engineers, or maybe people who are transitioning into the CEO role like you did from CTO. What should they know about being a good CEO that maybe isn't obvious coming from a technical background?
Yeah, that's a good question. I'm still learning, I would say. One thing that is mostly the same is that if you're founding a company or if you're part of leading a company, your most important thing is people. To talk to people, I think something that many people have to go through is you are suddenly in a spot where people look at you for answers. And it's easy, I think, to panic in that moment and then try to invent everything yourself. But hopefully you've built a great team, or you're on the verge of building a great team that can help complete you. I think that's also one thing. I promise I'm not a huge Steve Jobs nerd, but another thing that he said in a famous college video from a college is, you should hire people to tell you what to do. If you're not doing that, you're doing something wrong. You're kind of building it for your ego. It's okay to have a vision and bring people along, but it has to become something more than what you yourself can imagine. So listening to people and being able to articulate your vision in a way that invites others to say 1 + 1 = 3. I think that is a really important skill set, not just for the CEO, but everyone who is in some kind of leading position inside a company, but especially the CEO. I think another thing that I do a lot as a product-driven CEO, I use products all the time. Like, it's so easy to forget that because you have an idea of what you're building, but I think you have to kind of test your assumptions all the time. There are so many great things out there, not talking about just trying out your competitors, but of course you should absolutely do that, but also way different kinds of software to just both get a feel for or strengthen your taste in what is good and bad, but also get a feel for trends that are coming or maybe trends that are going the wrong way and you want to counteract. And I think every company that finds themselves being at the forefront at some point of setting a trend. Take linear as a famous example, right? With the black, purple, spacey website. As soon as people start copying it, it means, they've caught up with you and you need to go somewhere else. So I think that's a really important part of just browsing around and feeling what does the product landscape look like in total.
Interesting to hear you bring up linear, because as I was, preparing for this episode, I came back to linear in my mind a lot. Linear is obviously very famous for their design and their UX, their usability. I get that same sense from you guys and from what you built with Pitch. Very beautiful product, user experience is great. Was that a conscious choice? And if so, how do you think about that usability being a differentiator for you guys, either from the early days, or is that something that just sort of emerged from the culture of the company in the long term?
No, that was very, very conscious. So before we started Pitch, we worked together, I think, for 5 years on a product called Wunderlist, which was pretty hyped in a previous cycle of this startup carousel. The team that, so I was just an engineer back then, but the team that Christian and the other founders had built up were really, really product centric and design centric. We were really design driven to the point where, we would design things before we figured out how they should work a little bit. So maybe to a fault to a degree, but everything looked and felt amazing. And then we were acquired by Microsoft, and most of us spent around 2 years in there. And it is a giant company that has loads of resources, but also a lot of bureaucracy. To get anything done, you need a lot of people to put their stamp on your paper. So when we started Pitch, we had the idea of, first of all, before we even had the product idea, we just wanted to get together and work on something together and make sure we could have lunch together a few times a week. Corona put an end to that, but we still enjoyed working together. And it was a very explicit decision from the beginning that we should focus on building something that just feels great to use. Because I think it was true back then, and it's still true, a lot of software that people use really extensively to drive their business is just completely boring and lacks personality, and it all looks the same. I think it becomes a competitive edge where you can stand out. Doesn't mean that you have to do everything, that everything has to be unique. You should have an opinion about how things should work. You should think about what you want the world to look like and then try to build the software that enables that. And for us, that was, having been in Microsoft and having required all these stamps, one of the first things we decided for Pitch was everyone should have access to everything inside the workspace, and you can change stuff. So trust by default, but then you have version history for everything. So in case something goes wrong, and as programmers and product makers, we know that will happen. You can go back and restore another state.
When you're operating that way, it sounds like you're also thinking about shipping quickly. It's not just about making sure everything's polished. It's about doing so within a framework, within a way that you can still get product out there quickly and users' hands quickly. Because I think a lot of people fall victim to having to make that choice. But it sounds like you guys are trying to do both sides of that at the same time. And it sounds like it's working.
That was also something that was important from the beginning, and it has been ever since. We started building Pitch for ourselves, and I think that's a great way to start, because then you can rely a lot on your own taste. But as the product grows, the complexity around it grows, your target audience hopefully also grows with, shipping more and more. I think it becomes more and more important to get really fast feedback on everything. So, we like to, there's this famous idea of an MVP that has kind of been bastardized to mean something with low quality often. There's another version of it, which I think people call minimum lovable product. What is the smallest thing that you can build that someone understands what it's supposed to do and they can do it, but it also makes you feel happy and engaged about doing it. So I think that is the ideal goal for building a new feature or product, to try to get to that part as quickly as possible. And I think for that to feel seamless and easy, you often have to build your own tools for it. I mean, nowadays, I think there is more than when we started, but one of the first things that we built, for instance, was just immediate deploys of every change, so that for any small change, you can just give a URL to someone in the marketing team or a designer to check what does that feel like in real life. You don't have to pull down the Git repo and try to make the compiler work. And that way you can just have ideas. You make those changes quickly, and then you try to experience the result rather than reason about it in theory. Because I think that's where people get stuck with this chasing for perfect. You're doing a bunch of things and you think about what effect they would have, and then you layer more assumptions on top of that. And eventually you come out with something, but it's pretty far away from where you started. Or if we can have this cycle of have an idea, try it out, see what the reaction is, and then go back to make another change, I think that is a lot faster and also a lot safer than locking yourself into a cave for a while and, just hope we emerge with like a perfect thing.
It was interesting for me to hear you say that you guys started Pitch because it was something that you needed and that you wanted to build for yourselves. I agree that's a great way to start something new. But at the same time, presentation software is not a new market, right? There have been long-standing players in this market. So I'm curious, what was the opportunity that you saw early on enough? And also, why did that market seem like the most appealing for the group?
So we were actually looking at different ideas, trying to figure out something that is both a good market opportunity, but also something that excited us, that we could, get behind emotionally. And while we were at Microsoft, I've already ranted a few times about how corporate it was. And that's how a lot of companies work. You create a lot of presentations to get buy-in from a lot of people. The issue is, and also, so that's just the internal use case. A huge part of our world runs on people putting their thoughts on decks and showing it to other people to get funding, to make sales, to drive political decisions. But it's all done in tools that haven't really reimagined the format they're in since people were using overhead projectors like 30 years ago. And we found that we can trace a life cycle of a presentation that is not represented at all in software. So you would start in a notes app somewhere, and then you would go over to PowerPoint or Keynote and try to put all of that in there. You would then have a file that you have to email or maybe send it over Slack or HipChat to someone, and they will make some edits and send it back. And then at some point, you're going to take all of this work and then export it into a PDF that you distribute some other way, and then hope that someone replies to you and tells you what they thought of what you created. So our initial idea was, what if we can unbundle the Office suite, like unbundle PowerPoint from the Office suite, and then rebundle that to care for the whole life cycle of a presentation. So it starts with your ideas, and more importantly, so we have the whole editing experience where you should not have to send things around. You should just, how I described it in the early days, is that I want to create a wormhole for everyone who's working on a presentation to just transport to the same computer. We're working on one mainframe together. Nowadays, real-time collaboration is table stakes, but 6-7 years ago, it didn't exist everywhere. And so you were collaborating on this hopefully beautiful artifact that tells the story that you want to tell in a very compelling way. And instead then of exporting a PDF and maybe paying for a subscription to DocSend or something like that to make sure that you understand that someone reads it, we put that all in one tool where you can create multiple links from one presentation, send them out, see, does anyone even open this? Do they get past that slide where I have this complicated question? If you have a funding deck, does everyone bail where I say how much I want to raise? Gather all these kind of data points to make sure that there's again, I'm getting back to the feedback loops, right? You need to have some kind of loop to make of information to get better. And this was it was lacking in the tools that existed. It was possible, but really complicated, and you need to have to, stitch things together. So Pitch brought that all into one tool. And that's also why many people choose Pitch today, because they have some kind of use case that really drives their business, where the return of making a better deck, a more compelling deck, is really high.
That makes a lot of sense. That's what I've heard from a lot of founders as well. I'm curious though about the market. Like, originally I know you guys looked at this as a venture scale market, and that's the opportunity you wanted to go after, right? I think for a while you raised an $85 million Series B in 2021, if memory serves. But I think since then, you guys have sort of changed the direction of the company, sort of the aspiration of the company. Can you talk to me about that decision and how you guys figured it out between yourselves, how you communicated it to investors and employees, all that stuff?
Building an audience is a full-time job, or at least it can feel like that when you're busy running your startup. But with AI making software easier to build, getting distribution is more important than ever. I can help. After growing my LinkedIn to over 40,000 followers and having 100,000 across all platforms, as well as a 60,000 subscriber newsletter, I know how impactful having an audience can be when you're building a startup these days. So I started Megaphone Studios, a ghostwriting agency specifically built for founders and their startups. Think of us like your startup's chief content officer. We turn your LinkedIn, X, or newsletter into a machine for lead generation, follower growth, and building your influence as a thought leader in your space. Our process is super lightweight for you while still delivering content that only you uniquely could write. And our plans are flexible with no long-term lock-in, because we know how fast things can change at startups. Oh, and I brought my buddy Blake Emal along to help me run the business. He has even more followers than I do. So email me at hauk@megaphone.network and mention the pod for a first month discount.
Yeah, so we saw this from the beginning as a huge, like $1 billion opportunity. I think one thing that we underestimated is the power of suites. I mentioned before, like unbundling the Office suite, but so many companies that we've worked with, they have Office 365 or they have a Google subscription. So for one thing that we underestimated was the amount of leverage that you need to have for people to introduce another tool that does the job better. But if it doesn't do the job better for something that is really valuable to you, then you're probably not going to invest into it. So we thought that we would be able to capture a huge amount of, let's say, internal use cases where people create decks for each other. But what we found was that there's just not enough willingness to make those decks great, because the difference between a okay deck and a great deck is not that huge. But where we did find a lot of strong traction is anyone who's using a deck in some kind of external way, where this design collateral that you create is really helping driving your business, customer-facing teams, design agencies that make proposals, founders that are doing fundraising, like really high stakes moments where the deck is one huge part of, are you going to make it or not? So with that in mind, we realized during last year, as our growth was flattening out, we had built quite a big team trying to build out a very wide presentation platform that could cater to a whole bunch of different use cases. But we realized that it just wasn't there. And we were faced with the decision, like, do we wind down completely because it's the original thesis is not holding up? Or do we try to take a different perspective on this, look at the users where we do have strong traction, the markets where this kind of high return of investment is really worth the investment. And we came to an agreement with our investors to kind of refinance the company by giving back a lot of the money that we had raised. And in return, we could change a lot of the financial terms from our fundraising, like liquidation preference and things like that. So we could set with that, with the help of our investors, I have to say that we're great in all of this. We're able to put the company in a spot where the definition of success is very different in terms of size. Where we don't have to become a billion-dollar company in order for the company to pay for itself. Really, that doesn't mean that we don't have like long-term aspirations. But since we did the reboot in January, we've been really focused on talking to people that are in our target user group to understand their pain points and again, this life cycle of the presentation, as opposed to what we were doing, let's say a year prior, which was, trying to speak to as many people as possible at the same time. So I think in many ways, it's also made life a lot simpler and less stressful for everyone who's working on pitch, because we can imagine our target users now. They are clearly defined. We know them. We talk to them every week. And before it was more, everyone in the world who's open PowerPoint. It's hard to imagine those people.
You get spread super thin going that route. I'm curious, when you first brought this up to investors, how did they respond? How did they react?
Well, so they think that a lot of people saw the writing on the wall a little bit, that something wasn't working. This was also that during a time where Christian, our main co-founder, had stepped away from the business because of illness for a while. So our leadership team was kind of trying to fill his shoes all together while he was away. And I just felt that we were pushing and pushing, and we didn't get anywhere with it. You didn't get any extra momentum from pushing hard. And our investors and our board saw that as well. A quite easy discussion. Of course, figuring out the actual terms took a little bit longer, but like getting everyone on board on the general idea, I think was very easy. So I think maybe that's, if I should try to pat myself on the back or our founding team, is that we chose investors really well, working with Blue Yard and Index and Lakestar. And in each of those firms, we also had really good people being our partners. And I think they also saw, VCs have the benefit of looking at many different companies at the same time. And they saw that this was kind of a trend that was happening, where you basically have a few choices. One is to wind down completely. The other is to try to sell off what you have, the IP or the brand or whatever. And the third choice is to try to take a new perspective on what you're doing and see if you get it to work in another way. And this, of course, means in a way that they're also, underwriting, like they're accepting that they've lost some of their money. I think that, again, that helps if you have very reasonable people that you're working with that understand that the V in VC, it doesn't stand for sure return, but it is venture, right? It is risky.
What did you guys do to what did you look for in investors early on that gave you the confidence that, they are these people who do kind of understand how the startup world works and that these things happen and maybe they've been around the block? What did you look for?
One of the most important thing to look for, I think there are different ways where this relationship can happen. And there's some asymmetry to it. If you don't have a name, if you don't have any reputation already as a founder, it can be hard to get into the office of a VC, right? You probably have less of a choice, so you can be less picky to get that initial funding to just build a product and show that you have an idea worth betting on. I think in our case, it was a little bit different because Christian, or my co-founder, after he and his co-founders had sold Wunderlist, he also started doing some venture capital, some investments, and made a name for himself in that scene. So we actually had a very easy time to get into those rooms to talk to people. And that meant for us, we could be a lot more picky with finding the right partner that we felt would be maybe a great addition to our board that can help challenge us, or that is just a great person to have a little bit more on the side. They can help you with partnerships or making connections. And again, I think looking for people that are good people and reasonable people is really important. It's the same with whether you're considering letting someone invest in your company, or if you're hiring someone, or if you're thinking about someone as a co-founder. Like, you have to find a way to build up some trust really fast. And I think the way that Christian started that, and how I was doing it with him the whole time, is also to be very open about what is working and what is not try to put on a show too much. And there you will also see pretty early in the early conversations that people respond to that if they are in turn also open with their feedback. I think that is maybe the most important thing. And another thing is, when you show someone your product, if you have something already, which you hopefully do they get excited about it? Like, do they get excited about the product, or just about the potential return of capital? Which, they are, of course, in their business, they're of course excited about that, but it's such a important relationship that you will want to have someone that really looks at what you have been building, and then can come with ideas and can understand the vision that you have. That you shouldn't overlook that.
I think you've got more of the sales gene in you than you give yourself credit for, because I think when you're doing sales and partnerships, being super authentic and being upfront and looking for that stuff is very important. So give yourself some more credit there, man.
Well, I'm European. We like to stay humble.
So I guess the other side of all this is that obviously when you're scaling super fast and you're raising $85 million in a single round, as you mentioned, you're sort of hiring really broadly and you're hiring people to explore new areas and things like that. But then when you come back and you're like, all right, let's focus on our core customer, things change and founders have to make really hard decisions around who to keep on the team and layoffs and things like that. I think, how do you keep the rest of the team motivated when you go through something like that?
I think that's probably the most important question about doing such a reboot like we did. So we actually had 2 rounds where we shrunk the company. So first, end of 22, we went down from 160 to 120 something people, because we could just see that the traction was we were losing the momentum a little bit, and we just need to be smarter. And we did a lot of things right there. We also did some things not great necessarily with how we handled the whole transition. When we did the reboot now in January, we took a lot of lessons from there of how to initially approach the topic, how to practically perform it. I think when there is the news within the company that it's changing its size, maybe not even as dramatically as we did, going from 117 people down to less than 40. How you treat the people that are leaving will have a huge impact on how the people that are staying will feel. I think the initial feeling for someone who has to stay will almost always be relief, because it's hard to lose your job. But once they're over that will just be for a short while. And once they're over that, they will also look at, how did you treat my friends over here? So for us, that was really important, that part of this reboot deal that we did with our investors, that we had ample funding for significant severance packages, that we were generous with accelerating vesting on shares that people had been allocated. I think in our case, we also tried to make it as simple as possible, or rather easy. So we are a remote team. We were spread all over Europe, and some people in Brazil and the US. So we had shipped equipment everywhere. People have these Herman Miller chairs and their MacBooks and screens and everything. So we just said, you can keep it. Just keep that. That's a parting gift, because I think a lot of people also just have one computer. They have the computer that they use for work, they use for everything. So trying to be as generous and empathetic as possible with the people that have to leave. Number one. The second part for us was, you have to give people immediately a sense of purpose. And that is, for us, the whole company was dead. That was gone, and we needed to start over. So what I did was I had, well, first of all, we started with a new tradition, having a town hall once a week where the whole company gets together and we make sure that to a little bit like this Seinfeld Christmas thing, Festivus, we airing of grievances, right? So not, and we can talk openly about what just happened and also what's happening with our product. And then we set on a mission to get back to work as soon as possible to show ourselves and more importantly, our customers that we didn't just implode. We're able to run the product. We're able to make the hard decisions about maybe shutting some things off that we had bet on, but it didn't really pan out yet. So that we can stay really focused on still delivering great service and great software. We were worried there, of course, like going from 120 to 100 to 40 people. Can we even run the same system? Like we were just waiting to see like where did the alerts start? And I think we were very fortunate in that there weren't a lot of things that broke. The people that were forced to leave, they did a great handover. And there were just, let's say there were one or two things where we ended up having to firefight a little bit. For the most part, I think that that worked out. And then to give a sense of more sense of purpose, I started talking about two things initially. One was simplifying the company, because in a company that is scaled quickly, everyone feels the pain of that. I don't processes. Either you have too few of them, so no one knows what to do, or you're overreacting and you have too much of it to kind of standardize things, and everything is hard to do. We were in the latter part here. So I just told to my leadership team and the whole team, like, we're cutting almost all process. Like now we're 40 people. If we need something, we can, it's the size of a team that can be in one room and scream to each other if necessary. So we try to get that feeling where we're focusing on doing things rather than finding the perfect, writing the perfect process document to explain how you would do it. And that means also accepting that some things break, some things go bad, but you can fix it together. So that's one part. And the other was really refocusing on our customers and immediately going up, talking to them. And instead of, so in the past year, we had been kind of on a journey of trying to solve this growth that didn't work out by reaching for unicorn features that would change everything. But that was at the expense of doing the things that we knew would be impactful for our customers, right? That maybe smaller improvements, quality of life kind of things. So the first few months, we focused really only on that. Shipping fast, things that we know that people want to have, that they've been asking for. And that really helped get the team like moving in one direction, made the mood really good. And then there's another story about, setting a goal about profitability and being independent, which we were talking about as well. I think my answer is long enough already.
No, we can talk about that. One thing I'm curious about first, though, is one of the hardest things founders need to do in that situation is kind of tread the line between giving enough space and gravity to what's going on right now versus painting an effective vision and a new vision of where the company is going to go and the future, and getting people excited about being part of that. It sounds like you guys did a pretty good job of that. So I'm wondering if you have any advice for other founders who might be going through this.
Few thoughts around that. One is we tried to make sure that we can be as open as possible outwards about what's happening. So it doesn't feel like we have one tone inside the company and another out towards our customers where we're super cheerful and, this is the best thing that ever happened to us. We get in that kind of situation, you really have to be respectful that everyone that is forced to leave, they have put their blood and sweat and tears, maybe not so dramatic, but they put a lot of their effort into something, and then suddenly they're being asked to leave. So if they see you talking about things in this too cheerful way, it's going to be really hurtful. Being open that you don't have to speak with different voices in different rooms, I think it makes the whole thing a lot easier. The other thing that we did was we decided for a period where we would allow mourning. We would lead into kind of reflecting on what had happened and just processing it for the team that stayed. So it was about one week period where, like, on Monday, we announced that everything was happening. By the end of Monday, it was done. And then the next 4 days was mostly about having one-on-ones and, talking it through. And I think we also had an all hands where I just talked everything through again with everyone. Since we were changing our company so dramatically, and a lot of people had signed up for this fast growing thing, and that was the reason they wanted to be there. You're going to the moon. And now we were saying, well, actually, just getting to orbit is going to be our new goal. It's a very different goal. So because we had done this deal with our investors to have enough capital to pay a generous severance package, we offered that also to the people that we had selected to stay. So everyone who got those 4 days to think about it, do I really want to stay, or would I rather just, call it quits and search for something new? And we had, I think, 2 people that made that decision. Two people that have been with us almost since the start, that were maybe done with the whole thing, and didn't want to jump on a different carousel another time with us. Yeah. So at the end of that week, we had gone through a very quick life cycle of, like, the stages of grieving, and everyone who was left at the company had decided it, which meant that the following Monday, it felt very natural for us to get to work, to start thinking about the things that I mentioned before about, hyper focusing on our customers, because they rely on us. And if we can't take too much time and let, the PagerDuty alerts just hang, we need to, guarantee good service, good customer service. Yeah. So I think that those were the things that worked for us.
It sounds like you guys really thought about your employees first and foremost, which is really important. It says a lot. Okay, I want to talk about fundraising a little bit too. You guys obviously have been super successful raising a bunch before you refocus the company. And also a lot of people use your product for fundraising. So I imagine you have some insights based on that. I'm curious, sort of, what do you think the most common mistakes that founders are making when they're going out and fundraising are, maybe specifically with their deck?
Yeah. So I think you see a lot of decks that are just incomplete, I would say. Every type of fundraising, let's say every stage that you're at, they require slightly different things, and there are different expectations from VCs who, you also have to imagine that a VC, they're not looking at your company only, but they're looking at, 100 companies over a month, and do a lot of pattern matching. So to make sure that you, first of all, get in front of the eyes of not just the first person looking at your deck, but more people, I think you have to actually follow a pretty specific format of what to include, a storyline that fits to each stage, where, if you're past Series A, you should not forget to include your product, for instance. I think this is something that I've seen people do. Like, they don't show their product. That's also, like, product-driven founder. I want to put the product front and center. But if you're proud of it and you try to show it, that will kind of shine through. I think another thing that is fairly common is to have an ambiguous ask at the end. So if I can see how this happened, if you're not super confident, like you're trying to just get in the room and talk to someone, your ask the range might be very big. But I think in order for someone else, like, what you're trying to do is for someone else to just read through all of this and then picture what this thing could be 5-10 years in the future. So I think being as specific as possible about how much money do you want, sort of what you're willing to give away for that, and how you would spend it. I think that is like really important pieces that is somehow often missing. I think I saw a deck very recently that was really specific about that. And it was also a pretty technical product. So I could really imagine, what does this look like 2 years from now if things go well, which, hopefully they do. think that those are the most important things that I've seen. I think one thing to add, this is where also mentioning pitch, like one of the things that we saw pretty early on was that, of course, the people were using decks made in pitch to fundraise. And this idea I mentioned before that you just create something and send it out into the void, it's really hard, right? It's like, you're a musician and just upload your tunes to Spotify and you never get to know if someone even listened to it. So using whether it is pitch and the presentation analytics that we have in there or some other tool that does the same, being able to track if people get to the end, if they get to the ask, I think is a really important part about how you distribute it. Because more likely than not, you're not actually going to get it right the first time. The same as with a product, right? If you go into a cave and try to make it perfect, you're going to come out with something that is far from your vision, probably. So fundraising is also, it's a sales process, as you mentioned before, but I think when it's the best, it's very iterative. So you don't send your thing out to everyone all at once, but you pick a few people, you send it out, and even if you get a no, try to get some feedback or at least look at the presentation analytics to see if they got to the end, and then you try to tighten that and like work in that feedback loop so that eventually someone sees your deck and their jaw drops.
Really quick before we head into the kind of rapid fire outro that we do here, I would imagine your perspective on this is that a well-designed deck is better than a poorly designed deck based on the fact that you guys build pitch. I'm curious, like, make the case for that viewpoint, because I've heard some people make the opposite case. So curious what the case for it would be.
Well, so I think we live in a world of like visuals everywhere, saturated visuals. So it's really important to try to stand out. The majority of decks look terrible. So just by virtue of putting enough effort into it that people will go like, oh, well, this looks really professional or well designed, you're already one step ahead of the average person trying to raise money. I do think there is a lesson to be learned about over designing it, which is, why I would recommend a first time founder or someone who is not a designer themselves to actually use templates and then customize them rather than, trying to do it from scratch. Yeah. And really focus on the story over the visuals, but use a tool that helps you get the visuals crisp and nice from the beginning. And I think that we see that also with our customers that are not necessarily in fundraising situations, but that do pitching every day, creative agencies or customer facing teams, that the return of investment of doing that is really high. We actually had one customer that came to us recently. It was a creative agency or a design agency, and they had heard about pitch because they lost a pitch to another agency that was using pitch. And the beauty of the deck, the design of it, was stated as being like one of the major decision points. So they really got told by their potential client, like, the reason you lost to this other person is because they had a better looking deck. Pretty, as someone who creates that software, that's pretty amazing to hear.
That must be amazing to hear. I love that. Yeah, I mean, I use Pitch for context for my pitch deck template that I share out with all the readers of my newsletter and everything. So I can totally see how that plays a part. Let's do the rapid fire outro. So name an investor that you guys have worked with who other founders should take capital from and why.
So I would say Kieran O'Leary from Blue Yard Capital. So Blue Yard is really a European fund. He was also an investor in Wunderlist through another fund before. And he's just one of the people that had a really amazing vision for what the future of computing will be like. So a great discussion partner. Cannot recommend him enough.
What's one thing that you would change about the startup world?
Oh, one thing.
Just one.
Yeah. Well, I think there is much too much posturing and trying to look more successful than you are. and way too little vulnerability and openness.
I couldn't agree more. See it all the time. What's your number one piece of advice for a first-time founder?
Stay calm. It's never as bad as it seems, and it's never as good as it seems. And if you just keep going, it will feel better.
Don't die, right?
Yeah. Be alive.
Yeah, no, Adam, thanks for joining us, man. This was really great. Where can people find you? Obviously, they can find Pitch at pitch.com, but where can they find you online?
So I have my Twitter or my X. I think that's where I hang out online most. So it's just /Adam Rankland, just my name.
Cool. Everybody go follow this guy. Check out Pitch, use it for your decks. And yeah, we'll see you next time. Thanks.
Thanks for having me. Bye.
Thanks for listening. I write up my main takeaways from every conversation and make them available to all of our members at foundingjourney.com, along with a bunch of other perks and more content. If you found this conversation valuable, subscribe to Founding Journey on Spotify, YouTube, Apple Podcasts, or whatever your favorite podcast app is. I post a new episode every Thursday. Also, consider leaving us a rating or a review. As a brand new podcast, this is the best way for us to get out there and founders to find us. See you next time.